The history of sweet tea. Living in the South brings with it many time-honored traditions. One of those traditions is sipping a tall, cold glass of iced sweet tea while cooling off under the shade of a tall tree. It wouldn't be summer in the South without that cold, smooth elixir to help ward off the oppressive heat. It is served everywhere from McDonald's to the fanciest restaurants. In fact, in many restaurants, if you order tea, they will automatically bring you sweet tea. If you do not want it sweet, you have to specifically order unsweetened tea. It is such an institution in the Deep South that in Georgia in 2003, the Georgia House of Representatives legislated that any food service establishment which serves iced tea must serve sweet tea. Though the politicians who dreamed up this rule allowed for unsweetened tea to be served as well, any establishment that neglects to serve sweet tea shall be guilty of a misdemeanor of a high and aggravated nature. Sounds like Southerners take their sweet tea pretty seriously. But where did the tradition come from, and what was so special about sweet tea? The history of tea in the South dates back to the late 18th century. Tea cultivation in the United States was first attempted in 1744 when tea seeds were sent to the Trust Garden in Savannah, Georgia. However, South Carolina is the first place in the United States where tea was grown and is the only state to ever have produced tea commercially. Most historians agree that the first tea plants arrived in this country in the late 1700s when French explorer and botanist André Michaux imported it, as well as other beautiful and showy varieties of camomiles, gardenias, and azaleas to please the wealthy Charleston planters who wanted beautiful and fragrant plants. He planted tea near Charleston at Middleton Barney, now known as Middleton Place Gardens. The first successful recording of cultivation of tea plants in the United States is recorded as growing on Skidaway Island near Savannah in 1772. The first successful commercial attempt to produce tea in the U.S. was in 1848 at Golden Grove Plantation near Greenville, South Carolina, by a man named Junius Smith. Smith succeeded in growing tea commercially from 1848 until he was shot to death in 1853. After his death, the operation was discontinued. The next attempt was by Dr. Alexis Forrester, who oversaw a short-lived attempt in Georgetown, South Carolina, from 1874 until his death in 1879, when his buggy flipped as he attempted to outrun a group of bandits. Strangely enough, both men were victims of murder during their 5th year of operation. In 1888, Dr. Charles Shepard, a Ph.D. biochemist, established a Pinehurst plantation in Summerville, South Carolina. Pinehurst gained fame for its oolong tea, which claimed first prize at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. Shepard's plantation was an experimental farm that did well until his death in 1915. Fortunately, he died from natural causes and passed the unlucky 5th year. Years later, in 1963, after much trial and error, the Thomas J. Lipton Company established a tea research station on Wadmalaw Island. Tea plants were imported from the Pinehurst plantation. The research station operated for 25 years and at long last proved that a high-quality tea could be successfully grown in the South. Lipton eventually sold the land, and the estate became known as the Charleston Tea Plantation. Tea grown by this company was marketed under the name American Classic Tea and was the only tea ever commercially grown in South Carolina or anywhere else in North America. The Charleston Tea Plantation was sold in 2003 and is now known as the Charleston Tea Gardens. It is still the only working tea estate in the United States. But the tea plant is only part of the sweet tea puzzle. Anyone can take tea leaves and steep them in freshly boiled water. One of the best recipes for making tea says that water should be added to the tea leaves when it is approximately 99 degrees Celsius or 195 degrees Fahrenheit. Simply heat the water to the right temperature, pour it over the tea leaves, wait, and pretty soon you will have tea. All you need to make this tea is a teapot, some tea leaves, and a thermometer. But that doesn't mean you have that sacred summer treat. Any Southerner will tell you that you are missing one of the most important ingredients, sugar. The history of sugar in the South is almost as intriguing as the history of growing tea. Sugar did not originate in the United States. Just like tea, which was originally grown in countries like India and China, sugar was originally grown in Southeast Asia. However, as Europeans began to explore the islands of the Caribbean, they realized that the tropical climate there would be good for growing sugarcane, one of the most common plants used in the manufacture of sugar. These islands could supply sugarcane using slave labor and produce sugar at prices much lower than the sugarcane imported from Asia. Thus, the economies of entire islands, such as Guadeloupe and Barbados, became based on sugar plant production. By 1750, the French colony known as Saint-Domingue, which later became the independent country of Haiti, became the largest sugar producer in the world. The process of refining sugar was dangerous and required workers to routinely pour hot melted syrup from one pot to another as the syrup was turned into sugar. It was also costly to ship sugar, once it was made in the Caribbean, to the United States. In 1846, a French inventor from New Orleans, Louisiana, named Norbert Rayleigh, came up with an invention, an evaporating machine that replaced the old process of heating and pouring. It increased production and lowered costs. Sugar was now produced and refined in the state for a fraction of the cost. As a result, sugar became more easily affordable and accessible. Legend tells us that in the summer of 1904, the heat of the World's Fair in St. Louis was simply unbearable. An Indian tea merchant was unable to sell his tea. Who wanted to drink hot tea while standing under the hot summer sun? In an effort to save his business, the merchant added sugar and water to his tea, poured it over ice, and sweet iced tea was born. Ice has not always been plentiful in the South, however. Before the invention of the refrigerator, ice was created naturally in the far northern states and shipped by train south. The problem was that by the time the ice made it all the way to the southern states, there simply wasn't much ice left. Frederick Tudor and Nathaniel Wyeth were part of the first inventors to tackle this problem. They experimented with various types of cutting and insulating the ice, which allowed for faster shipping and less melting. Ice was expensive to get and hard to keep. Ice-cold drinks were mainly a privilege enjoyed by the rich in Southern hospitality. There was even a popular saying in the time that said the rich have their ice in the summer and the poor man has his in the winter. However, the invention of the refrigerator changed all that, as ice truly became accessible to the common man. By the 1920s, the household refrigerator was an essential piece of kitchen furniture. In 1921, 5,000 mechanical refrigerators were manufactured in the U.S. 10 years later, the number grew past 1 million, and just 6 years after that, nearly 6 million. As electricity became available in even the remotest areas of the South, thanks to the Tennessee Valley Authority in the 1930s, the ability to keep food cool and make ice became as common as Southern hospitality itself. So the next time you pull into your favorite fast food drive-thru for a quick sip or pull that gallon of tea from your refrigerator at home, take a moment to reflect on the history of that wonderful drink all of us Southerners take for granted.